Let's talk about Islam in the Islamic world. Kind of an important civilization. When we look at that civilization, particularly after the fall of the Western Roman Empire in the medieval world that emerges there, the world of the Franks and Charlemagne, Islamic civilization is going to be much more advanced, sort of intellectually, scientifically, maybe even culturally, although you get into issues of ethnocentrism with all of that. But there are major problems in Western Europe after the fall of Rome. The Byzantine East, of course, is quite advanced. Islamic civilization is going to be also have pockets where you have this amazing outburst of sort of scientific, intellectual, and even philosophical speculation going on. So let's look at this. Islam is a religion, and it's one of the world's major religions today. There you see the Dome of the Rock mosque in Jerusalem, supposedly where Muhammad's soul ascended into heaven. Jerusalem is one of those cities today that has at least a connection to three major religions: Islam, Christianity, and Judaism as well. They're not always including followers who get along with each other. But when we look at Islamic civilization, we start in the Arab world. Arabia, today Saudi Arabia, it's named after a royal family, the Saudis. But Arabia, the Arabs, where they speak Arabic, among other languages. There's a lot of other languages there. But in the pre-Islamic civilization, you see a few cities there, Mecca being one of the important cities. It's a commercial and intellectual center, Mecca in Arabia. It's ultimately going to become the most important city of Islam. It's a religious center at that time, has a sacred shrine known as the Kaaba, which you'll see in a second. It's sacred to this polytheistic world prior to the takeover of Islam, the triumph of Islam. So it's already a religious center. It's an important city. And then on the outskirts, you have various groups of people known as Bedouins organized into tribes who are related, with members who are related to each other. These are the clannish things with blood relations. And one of the things that's going to happen with Islam is it's going to try to replace this whole notion of loyalty based on blood to loyalty based on your religious belief and the language you speak, Arabic. The prophet of Islam, the great prophet of Islam, is Muhammad. Muhammad, we think, is born around year 570 in Mecca, that city. Worked in the caravans trade after he was orphaned at an early age. He ends up marrying a wealthy widow who owns several caravans, gives him some free time. He doesn't have to work as much. Sometime around the age of 40, we think he begins getting revelations from God. According to Islamic tradition, he gets revelations from God. He has this incredible religious experience. Later on, these revelations are going to be written down in the holy book of Islam, known as the Quran. His followers write these down. These are direct revelations from God, according to Islamic tradition, written in the Quran, the holy book. No particular order. Well, there is an order, the longest to the shortest, but not like the first and second, third, longest to the shortest revelation. It's the most sacred book in Islam, sort of the second most sacred, or as sacred, we could say. It depends on your views on that one, is the Hadith, which talks about Muhammad's life, stories about him, and also some of his sayings, which are written down in the Hadith. And with the Quran and the Hadiths, you get Sharia law emerging as that, and also you get a lot of cultural expectations for the behaviors of devout Muslims who want to mirror the life of Muhammad and try to practice the faith as it's interpreted, by various religious leaders as well. Muhammad, he's going to organize himself around this new religion, revelations from God, where God appears to him through the angel Gabriel, and he tells the Arabs to repent of their ways. There's only one God. Abandon this polytheistic religion that you have, because there is only one God, and that is Allah, or the God. It's the same God as the Jewish God, same God as the God of the Christians. Muslims are going to have a different interpretation of Jesus. Muslims generally think of Jesus as a prophet, and Muslims believe that Christians ruined it by turning him into a god, making him divine. But it's the same God, the one God. And in Mecca, you had Jews and Christians in Mecca. So Muhammad is familiar with some of those ideas. So he goes to Mecca with a number of followers and tries to convert the people of Mecca. It doesn't work. And he and less than 100 followers are going to have to flee Mecca, a major event in the history of Islam, known as the Hydra, where they go to nearby Medina. Technically, it took a year to get there. It's not that far away, but technically it took a year. They got there. The year 622 is the year of the flight. That becomes year one of the Islamic calendar, but you know the West and the rest of the world follow a Western calendar with the BCE and CE designations or organizations. But he gets to Medina, the second most important city in Islam. Medina organizes the people there into a religious community known as the Ummah. Ummah is a religious community where religion is more important to any loyalty you may have to a particular tribe or a clan, I should say. And from Medina, he sort of begins to branch out, spread Islam. Muhammad is also a military leader. Muhammad owned slaves, bought, sold, and owned slaves as well, captured slaves as well. So in a sense, he's a different sort of prophet than what you see earlier on in the monotheistic faiths. And so they start attacking caravans. They build up strength in Medina. And finally, they're going to be able to return to Mecca in the year 630. And that's when the people of Mecca are going to convert to Islam, and Mecca is going to become the holiest city of Islam. And what you begin to see with Islam is that it's different in the way it spreads than Christianity. You know, Christianity also spread by the sword, by the way. Remember that. A number of German rulers, German tribal leaders embraced Christianity because they thought that would lead them to success on the battlefield. It's similar with Islam, but also Islam spreads much more rapidly than Christianity, much more rapid spread. You can see all of Arabia, for the most part, is Islamic by the time of Muhammad's death, just a couple of years after this. And so what does Islam mean? As I said, it has some similar teachings to Judaism and Christianity. It's a monotheistic faith. Christians and Jews are people of the book. Moses is a prophet. Jesus is a prophet for Muslims, but Jesus is not divine. Islam is different in that you don't really have a similar type of religiously based order like the clergy has within Christianity. They don't have sacraments like they do within Christianity. And also, unlike Christianity, they're basically these 5 things that all Muslims are supposed to accept, believe, and follow. What they're often called pillars of the faith, the 5 pillars of the faith. The word Islam itself means submission. That would be the first one. Islam, submission. All Muslims are supposed to submit to God's will. The one who submits is a Muslim. That's what a Muslim is called, one who submits to God's will. So it's the very definition of Islam, submit to God's will. You're also supposed to pray 5 times a day, facing Mecca. You're supposed to do charity work, give alms to the poor, help the less fortunate. During the holy month of Ramadan, which is on the lunar calendar, so it changes annually, you have to provide extra prayers to Allah, and you have to fast during the daylight hours. That can be interpreted differently, but no food and water during the daylight hours. When it's dark, that's when you can eat and drink. But fasting and prayer for an entire month of Ramadan during the daylight hours. And finally, you as a Muslim are required to make a pilgrimage to Mecca at least once in your life. And if you can't do it, something gets in the way, you're supposed to assist someone else's pyramid going to Mecca. The Muslim who follows these things can hope for salvation. And there you can see an image of in Mecca of the pilgrimage there with the Kaaba right there. It becomes a sacred shrine within Islam. So I said the Muslim who follows these requirements, these pillars, can hope for salvation. But there's this concept of predestination there. God already knows whether you'll be saved or damned. So you can't tempt God's fate. He already knows. There is this concept, though, of a holy war called jihad. Now, some people today in the modern age some Muslim scholars may say that jihad is really a personal battle, an inner battle against sin. But throughout much of its history, and even today, jihad means holy war, an actual war against the unbelievers or against those who threaten Islam. And according to the concept of jihad, if you die in a holy war, you go straight to paradise. A couple of other interesting aspects of Islam. Unlike, say, I'm in South Louisiana now. Unlike South Louisiana, there's no alcohol. You're not allowed to drink alcohol. You're not allowed to gamble. And you're not allowed to loan money and collect interest on the money you loan. Polygamy is allowed. You can have more than one wife, up to 4 wives. Most Muslims only have one wife. You have to be considerably wealthy. Later on, we'll see that harems become important within Islam. And women, to a significant degree, have less freedom of action than men do within Islam. But part of that is cultural. You see that back into the ancient world, even within Christianity or Judaism as well, up until the modern age. There's also this key figure within Islam known as the caliph or caliph, the caliph. That is, after Muhammad dies, you have to pick a successor. And the first caliph, who is both a military leader, a religious leader, a political leader, is a guy by the name of Abu Bakr. Abu Bakr. He becomes the first caliph. And under the leadership of the first 4 caliphs, Islam spreads out of Arabia into Persia, conquers North Africa, moves into the Holy Land, and moves into Europe, into Spain. So it spreads quite rapidly. From Spain, a group of Muslims invade France. This is a time period when the Franks are in charge of France. Their military leader, not their king, their military leader is a guy by the name of Charles Martel. His cavalry, his Frankish cavalry, defeats this Muslim raiding force in the Battle of Tours or the Battle of Poitiers in 732. And Muslims retreat back to Spain, where they control most of Spain for centuries, into the 13th centuries. You can go to Spain today and see remnants of the Islamic culture that prevailed there for centuries. Amazing city like Cordoba was there. Muslims in Spain are called Moors. Shakespeare wrote about a Moor, Othello, in one of his books. And you can see here the expansion of Islam. Look at over here. You've got Arabia. Here's Mecca. Here's Medina. This is Arabia. This is the land of the Arabs, Arabia. Those 2 important cities, and then it spreads out into the Persian Empire, the Sassanids, you can see, into North Africa and into Spain, defeating these Germanic tribes along the way, defeating the Sassanids, threatening the Byzantines. Very, very effective fighters. Now, there is today a division within Islam, a major division within Islam between Shiites and Sunnis. And it goes back to just recognizing different caliphs in the 7th century. Ali was one of these caliphs. He gets assassinated. He's going to be replaced by Muawiyah, who became leader, founds the Umayyad dynasty. And what you begin to see is that groups of Muslims recognize different caliphs. Some point to Ali, some point to different caliphs. And this leads to a permanent split between Sunnis and Shiites. Most Muslims today are Sunnis. They have ulamas, judges and jurists, and various religious leaders who interpret religious laws. That's the Sunnis. Most Muslims are Sunnis, like Saudi Arabia, predominantly Sunni. Those who follow Ali, who thought the caliph, the leadership of being a caliph over the Muslim world should be traced to Ali, they're Shiites. They have imams as religious leaders, and Shiites are a majority today in Iran in particular, which would have been Persia, and in Iraq. It's not about doctrine. They are all Muslims. They believe largely the same things, but they're just recognizing different sort of religious traditions in terms of leadership. The Umayyad Caliphate, I just mentioned that, by Muawiyah, founded by Muawiyah, with its capital as Damascus in Syria today. Very, very impressive empire, multi-ethnic. One of the interesting things, it takes a while. Arabs do conquer this region. They do move into North Africa. It takes a while to convert a lot of these people. You still have a lot of Christians within this sort of empire, this caliphate. The largest group, in fact, within there would have been Christians, but it's very much a multi-ethnic empire. It'll last for a few generations. It's going to be replaced by the Abbasids with a capital at Baghdad. Baghdad becomes one of the marvelous, marvelous cities in this sort of time period. We look at it as sort of the Middle Ages, as it's characterized in European history. Capital, major center of learning, center of business activity. The Abbasids use different groups of people as soldiers, including the Turks. The Turks are impressive. They use slaves as soldiers, and it's these Turks who are going to end up protecting Egypt from the Mongols who try to conquer Egypt. The Mongols are unbelievably impressive. It's a large empire. How do you rule a large empire? Where you appoint governors called emirs, governors. That sort of practice is copied from the Persians. You can see that the empire sort of moved to the east, so they have some Persian aspects to this empire. And during this time period, we also begin to see some of these independent areas within the caliphate, within the Islamic world, the Fatimids in Egypt and Spain. We already talked about the Moors in Spain, but here's this massive, massive empire you could see. I should say caliphate, or this is really the Islamic world, it's not the caliphate. The Islamic world, you can see how much of it and how much it spread rapidly, much more quickly than Christianity, and at the expense of the Byzantine Empire over here. The Byzantine Empire is getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and will ultimately come to an end in 1453 when it's conquered by Muslims. Muslim Turks. This would be a different group of Turks, though. There are varieties of different Turks. One of the things about the Turks is that they're amazing, amazing warriors. You put them on horses and they can fight and they can win. They tend to be slave soldiers within the Muslim world. They will ultimately convert to Islam, because if you convert to Islam, you can no longer be a slave. But very, very important in fighting off some of the enemies, but also converting to Islam and expanding the Islamic world that way. A big major battle we're going to see that leads sort of to the development of the Crusades, the Battle of Manzikert, where they defeated the Byzantine Empire and began moving into the Byzantine Empire. They protect against the Mongols. Not always. The Mongols themselves have Turkish people. That is, there are a variety of different groups who are Turkic, speak that language, and the Mongols are unbelievably powerful. Genghis Khan, or Genghis Khan, you might have heard of him. Later, his grandson, Hulagu, an amazing warrior, but unable to conquer Egypt because the Mamluks protected Egypt. Those are Turkish slaves who were warriors who defeated the Mongols and protected the independence of the Fatimids over here in Egypt. But you can see the Seljuk Turks. That's the first major group of Turks who convert to Islam. They fight as warriors, they convert to Islam, and they spread Islam where they go. And you can see they're threatening the Byzantine Empire as well. Mentioned slavery. Slavery is a big part of Islamic civilization. There's a slave trade within the Islamic world, usually captured people in warfare. But also slavery from Africa as well, sub-Saharan African slave trade. That's not just the West that does that, it's also the Islamic world. Women were often slaves. They performed a variety of things. Some were educated, some became concubines, others singers, dancers within the court. As I said earlier, harems are important, protecting women, and harems for men as well. One of the interesting things is the use of eunuchs as well, castrated men. The Chinese are going to use them because they're a little bit easier to control. You don't have to worry about any sexual intrigues among them. Eunuchs to protect the harem, to protect women, because obviously they're not interested in women. Also, one of the interesting innovations within slavery, how do you become a slave? Well, some slaves would be able to buy their freedom. You convert to Islam if you're a warrior. The Turks did that in particular. Another thing that can happen, a child from a Muslim master, a child of a slave woman from a Muslim master is automatically free. Let's just leave it at that time, or considered free. There are instances where that didn't happen, of course, but for the most part, theoretically, they're supposed to be set free. It makes it different from the American version of slavery and slavery elsewhere as well. Mystical tradition of the Sufis. The Sufis are an interesting group, the whirling dervishes. The dervishes, the Quran is very important to them. They engage in sort of a mystical sort of aspect of Islam that made it unique. You saw some of that. There's some of that in Christianity. There's some of that in other religions. This is one of these sort of similar groups within Islam. Lots of prayer, lots of fasting. They enter into trances, do some dancing. These are the Sufis, the dervishes, who seek this sort of personal, intimate connection with God. The sort of practice, the rituals of just following those 5 requirements, or something that didn't concern them as much, or something they thought was insufficient at the time. The leaders are called sheikhs, by the way. At times they were persecuted by more mainstream Muslims, the Sunnis and the Shiites, but it's an interesting group of people, Christians and Muslims. As I said, Muhammad was familiar with Christianity. There were Christians within Mecca, and there are similarities where there's a lot of interaction, particularly in the business world, Jews in particular as well. Jews and Christians often had to pay a tax to live in the Muslim world. They were called dhimmis. people of the book, but for them to live, they had to pay a tax. But there's some trade going on. There's interactions among these two groups. Both of these groups were highly suspicious of them. They didn't necessarily respect each other's religions. They thought, if Christians thought that Islam was a sort of contaminated version of religion, and they were worried about that. Muslims think that something similar about Christians as well. There are Christians who convert to Islam, and they can be a bit suspect in some reason. They were called Mozarabs, but you do have people like that. A Muslim who converted to Christianity gets a death sentence, though. They gets a death sentence. You're not supposed to convert to any other faith if you are a Muslim. So anyway, one of the things that happens, there are times when there are peaceful interactions. Christians live within Muslim empire. Muslims not necessarily treated well within Christian empires or Christian kingdoms, by the way. But a particular event that creates great bitterness and enmity between these two groups was the Crusades, that I'll cover in another lecture as well. Just some other observations about Islam. As I said, it's a society that embraces intellectual pursuits, scientific pursuits, where those things kind of die out in Western Europe, not in the Byzantine Empire, but they die out in Western Europe. They preserve a number of Greek and Roman texts. You had a number of Muslim scholars who admired Greek and Roman thought. They give us Arabic numbers, Arabic numerals. Imagine having to count using Roman numerals, and Arabic numerals come from India, by the way. They should be Indian or Hindu numerals, but they're handed down as Arabic numerals, and that's a major thing. Imagine Roman numerals are just unwieldy. And some of these other things are already covered as well. The veil, you'll see women becoming veiled, accepting the veil, and at times accepting full, the burqa or even more covering for women beyond veils. Initially, the veil was to distinguish women from being female slaves. No, these are Muslim women. These aren't slaves. They're sort of free women, urban women. And then that practice is going to be extended in some areas where women are going to have to cover up even more than just wearing a veil. And there's also an issue today about the veil within Islamic society and in Western society as well. Christians also in the ancient world wore veils, by the way. What else is going on? I already mentioned the different, the schism, the split between Shiites and Sunnis. And so you begin to see, what you begin to see is this world getting established. It survives, it perseveres, it expands, and it's one of the major faiths in the world today. And we'll stop right there.